The child reached up and took my hand before I understood what was happening. I was crossing the inner corridor on my way to the East Passage, moving at a pace that made the guard step aside, when something small and warm caught my fingers and held them. I looked down. A girl, 4 years old perhaps, with dark curls and a smudge of flour on her left cheek, stared up at me without a trace of fear and said, "You're the tall one." I said, "I am." "My ma'am says I am not to bother the tall one." "Your ma'am is wise." She considered this. She did not let go of my hand. "I lost the green thread," she said, as though this were a crisis of equal weight to anything I had managed that morning. "Ma'am was going to use it for the hall runners and now I can't find it." I should have walked on. I had 3 council members waiting, a border assessment unread, and a decision about the eastern granary that would affect the next 2 seasons. I looked down at the child's very serious face and heard myself say, "Where did you last have it?" "In the box," she said, "but then it wasn't." "Thread does that," I said. She looked at me with the expression of someone who found this observation unsatisfying. "Do you know where it is?" Her name was Pip. I would learn this in the next 60 seconds. Her mother came around the corner at a run, a cloth still in her hands from where she had been working, and stopped so fast she nearly fell. The color left her face in a way that told me she had spent the last 2 minutes in genuine terror. She dropped into a bow, so fast it must have hurt her knees. "My lord," she said, "I am so sorry." She slipped away from me. She does that. She's very fast. I did not know she had come into the passage. "She found my hand," I said. "I did not mind it." The woman straightened just enough to look at me properly. Brown eyes, careful. A maid's uniform, good quality but worn at the cuffs. She was perhaps 25, no more, and she had the look of someone who had learned a long time ago to assess every room before she walked into it and to stand in the part of it that was closest to the door. Not a fearful look, a practical one. A woman who had made herself good at reading where the exits were. "Pip," she said, and her voice was entirely steady even though her hands were not. "Come here." The child considered this, and then, with great solemnity, let go of my hand and crossed to her mother's side. "The green thread is in the linen chest," I said. "Second shelf. There was a skein of it put aside for the hall runner repair. I authorized it 2 months ago." The woman stared at me. "I review all supply requisitions," I said. "Tell her it is not lost." She looked at me for a moment longer than was strictly formal. Then she said, "Thank you, my lord," and took her daughter's hand and walked away. I stood in the corridor for 3 more seconds than was necessary. My wolf was very quiet, not still in the way he was before a fight. Before a fight he was sharp and narrow, drawing himself down into readiness. This was a different stillness. The way he went when something important was happening, and he did not want to interrupt it. The way he went when he was listening carefully to something he had not heard in a long time. I went to my council meeting. I answered every question correctly. I do not remember what any of them were. Her name was Maid. I found this out by asking Oswin, my seneschal, that evening in a tone I intended to be casual. Oswin had served my father before me and was 62 years old, and had the disposition of a man who had seen everything twice and been surprised by none of it. He had a way of answering questions that told you exactly how much he already knew about why you were asking, and he had that way now. He told me Maid had come to Westholt 2 years ago from the Revel settlements on the Western Reach. She had no pack of her own, she had left one, he said carefully, and did not explain further, and I did not ask. She was in charge of the upper hall linen, the runner repairs, and the coordination of the mending crew. She was, by every account, exact. No complaints. No errors in the supply logs that he had ever found. "And the child," I said. "Hers," Oswin said. "Pip. She brings her to work because there is no one to leave her with. The pack families don't take in unmated omegas, my lord, you know how it goes. I allowed it. The child is quiet and stays in the linen rooms. Mostly. Except when she escapes into the corridor, I said. Oswin looked at me with the particular expression he reserved for moments when I had done something he found either touching or foolish, and had not yet decided which. She came back with flour on her face, he said. Not from my kitchens. From the trial batch Bryn was running in the East Bakehouse. The child was in the bakehouse for approximately 12 minutes before her mother retrieved her. She apparently talked Bryn into giving her a piece of proof dough, which she then sat on. The bench stool. She sat on the bench stool, my lord. Something moved in my chest that I would not have been able to name with any precision. She is 4, I said. 3.5, Oswin said. She told Bryn she was 4. I dismissed him. I sat with the border assessment for an hour and found, at the end of it, that I had read the same paragraph 4 times and retained approximately none of it. I thought about a child with dark curls and a smudge of flour who had reached up and taken the hand of the Alpha King of Westhall because she had lost a thread and needed someone to ask. Then I thought about something else, or tried to. My wolf was not quiet the next morning. He was not loud either. What he was alert. I felt it before I opened my eyes, that particular sharpening of his attention that meant he was tracking something he did not yet have a name for, but that he was very interested in finding one. I dressed, attended to my morning duties, and found myself taking the corridor route past the upper hall instead of the east passage. This was not a longer route. It was also not a shorter one. It was simply a different one, through a part of the keep I had no particular reason to visit, past the doors I had no particular business at. The door to the linen room was open. I heard her before I saw her, a low voice, very even, working through what sounded like a morning count. She was going through the runner inventory, reading from a ledger, and the child was sitting on a low stool beside her, moving small wooden pegs between 2 boxes in a game she had invented and was playing with complete seriousness. I stood in the doorway long enough that I should have said something and didn't. Merritt looked up. Something moved across her face, the same careful assessment as the day before, quick and practiced and precise, and she rose from her stool and began to bow. "Don't," I said. She paused. "You're in the middle of a count. You'll lose your place." She straightened slowly, watching me. 37, she said. "Pardon?" I was on 37. There was something in her voice that was not quite dry enough to be humor and not quite flat enough to be formality. It occupied a careful space in between. I was beginning to understand where she lived. That is where I was, in case you needed to know, my lord. I didn't, but now I do. I leaned against the doorframe. I was not sure what I was doing. My wolf had gone very alert again, very warm, and I had learned a long time ago that when he felt like that, I should pay attention to my surroundings. So I was paying attention to my surroundings, and my surroundings were a linen room with a precise woman and a child who had now noticed me and was staring. "You found the thread," I said, because I could see it, a skein of green on the second shelf, exactly where I had said it would be. "I did, thank you." A silence. Pip said, "You're the tall one." "I am," I said, "and you are Pip." She looked pleased that I knew this. "I made a game," she said, and held up the 2 boxes with the wooden pegs. "What are the rules?" She opened her mouth, and I realized she had not thought this far ahead. Her mother made a sound that she covered very quickly and which was not, I was fairly certain, a cough. "There are 37 pegs," Pip said finally, "same as the runners." "Then you're doing the count," I said, "the same as your ma'am." She considered this very seriously. "Yes," she decided, "I am helping." I looked at Merritt. She was watching her daughter with an expression I could not quite read, pride and something underneath it that was much quieter, and that she did not seem to want observed. She felt me looking and glanced up, and for a moment we were simply 2 people looking at the same small person who had decided she was doing an inventory. "She helps," Merritt said. "In her way." I can see that. I pushed off the doorframe and walked away before I said anything else. I did not know how to explain. I will be honest with myself about what happened in the following 3 weeks, because the story is not worth telling if I am not. I started walking past the linen room in the mornings. Not every morning, most of them. And when the door was open and I could hear the count or the child's voice or sometimes just the quiet of good work being done, I slowed down. Sometimes I stopped. Sometimes I went in and asked a question I did not need answered and listened to the answer as though I did. What I found in the listening was this: she was not a simple woman. She had a way of thinking about problems that was structural rather than intuitive. She approached everything the way a surveyor approaches an irregular field, not by walking across it and guessing, but by taking careful measurements at fixed points and then deriving the shape from those. She did not speculate. When she did not know a thing, she said so and then found out. When she knew a thing, she said so without apology. The third time I came to the linen room, she had a length of hall runner spread across 2 trestles and was measuring a section of worn weave with a straight rule. The child was drawing something in a small book with a stub of charcoal. I asked about the runner. She told me it would need to be replaced at the seams rather than patched, that the base weave had thinned past a certain point where additional thread work would not hold the traffic, and that if I wanted to save the original pattern, she could make a rubbing of the undamaged section and use it as the template for a new length. I had not known that was something she could do. I said, "Show me." She placed a sheet of thin paper over the pattern section and ran a flat edge across it until the weave impression came through. She held it up. Every line of the original design, the interlocked chevrons that had been on the hall runners as long as anyone could remember, the ones my mother had requested and my father had kept, came through clean and sharp on the paper. I looked at it for a long time. "The design is 40 years old," I said. "I know," Oswin told me. She kept her voice entirely even. "I thought you would want to keep it." I wanted to ask her how she had known to ask. I did not. I said, "Yes, make the rubbing. I'll authorize whatever materials you need." She lowered the paper and looked at me with those careful brown eyes. She was not a woman who looked away quickly. I had learned this. She looked directly and read what she found and filed it somewhere and did not perform uncertainty she did not feel. I found this. I was trying to find the right word for it internally in the part of my mind where my wolf listened and noticed things. I found it steadying. The way a plumb line is steadying. Not a comfort precisely. A reference point. "Pip drew you," she said, and tilted her head toward the child. Pip held up the small book. On the page was a very large rectangle with 2 small circles that were eyes and a long line that were, I understood after a moment, my arms. Beneath it, in careful letters she was only just learning to make, it said, "The tall one." Something happened in my chest that had nothing to do with my wolf and everything to do with my wolf, and I was not going to examine it here in the linen room in front of her mother. "It's a good likeness," I said. Pip beamed. The 4th week, I came to understand the shape of their days. Merritt arrived at the linen room before dawn and did her account work while the keep was quiet. The child slept in the back corner on a folded blanket until approximately the 7th hour, which was when she woke and immediately had opinions. The opinions were generally about the following categories: what she was going to draw next, whether there were interesting things happening in the corridor, and the wolves. She had strong feelings about the wolves. There were 9 wolves quartered in the inner ward, my wolves, the ones closest to me, the ones who had been with me the longest. She had named 3 of them by the end of the 3rd week. The names were Bramble, Pocket, and Soot. She had named Soot because, she explained to me, he was the same color as the charcoal she drew with, and she had named Pocket because he was the smallest and she felt he looked like something you would keep safe. "And Bramble," I said. "Because he is prickly," she said, "but also soft." Bramble was my oldest wolf, 12 years, a gray and silver animal who had been with me since before Sira died and who had, in the years since, developed a disposition that was charitable to no one except me. He had taken 3 days to allow Merritt to come near him. He had taken 1 afternoon to allow the child to sit on his feet. I had watched this from the east yard. He had not moved for 40 minutes. She had drawn his portrait in the small charcoal book, a portrait that bore a distinct resemblance to a very large rectangle, and shown it to him, and he had looked at it with what I could only interpret as dignity. I found I was spending a good deal of time watching things from the corridor, or the yard, or wherever I happened to position myself in the vicinity of the linen room without quite going in. Oswin found me in the corridor once at the 9th hour, doing nothing in particular in a hallway that had no meetings or records that required my presence. He looked at the linen room door. He looked at me. He said nothing, which was worse than if he had said something. The difficulty arrived in the 4th week, in the form of a man named Seth. He was a senior packman from the eastern stores, large, loud, confident in the way of men who have never been told no clearly enough, and have interpreted this as evidence of their own appeal. He had taken to appearing in the upper corridor during the hours Merritt worked, making conversation that was not conversation, standing in the linen room doorway in a way that was not standing, and making comments that were not comments. He had a way of addressing her that was too familiar, and a way of looking at Pip that was too indifferent, which was, I found, perhaps the part that bothered me most. A man who speaks too familiarly to a woman and then does not see her child at all is telling you exactly what he thinks they are worth. I learned about this from Oswin, who told me with the measured precision of a man reporting a fact that he had personally found unacceptable for some time, and was relieved to finally have cause to raise. He said Merritt had handled it without complaint. He said she had developed a system of leaving the room when Seth appeared, taking the child and the work to a different part of the keep, and then returning when he was gone. He said she had not asked for help. She would not, I said. No, Oswin said, she would not. He was quiet for a moment, and I was quiet for a moment, and the understanding between us was entirely clear. I was in the middle of a supply review when Oswin told me this. I closed the folder I was looking at, and was quiet for long enough that Oswin said nothing, which was how I knew he agreed with whatever I was about to do. I found Seth in the upper corridor the following morning. He was leaning against the wall opposite the linen room door with a kind of studied ease that made my wolf cold very fast and very cleanly. He saw me coming and straightened in a way that was not quite fast enough. I did not raise my voice. I am not a man who needs to raise his voice. I said, the upper hall corridor is not on your duty route. Your route is the eastern stores to the outer yard and back. I have the map of it in my records if you would like to confirm this. He said nothing, which was the correct response. If I find you in the upper corridor again without a written assignment from Oswin or from me personally, I will require a formal explanation filed with the records office, and I will review it myself. Do you understand? He said he understood. He did not come back. I told no one I had done this, and I did not tell Merritt directly. What I knew was that the child's game had moved back to the linen room doorway by the following week, where it had been before, where she could play and watch the corridor and run back inside when something interesting went past, and that was sufficient accounting for me. What I had not accounted for was that Merritt, being who she was, would notice the details of how it had been done. She noticed that there had been no formal complaint filed. She noticed that there was no record of a disciplinary conversation in the Eastern Store's logs. She noticed that the outcome, a man's sudden and permanent absence from a corridor he had been occupying, had been achieved without a single written document or a single raised voice. She had worked in enough places to know that outcomes without documentation meant that whoever arranged them had sufficient authority to make the arrangement by presence alone, and sufficient care about precision, not to make it loud. She filed this away. I understood later that she had been building a picture of me, quietly, since the first week. She asked small questions of Oswin, of Pavin, of the bakehouse boy Bryn, and she listened to the answers carefully and cross-referenced them against what she saw and gradually composed something she could trust. It was exactly how she approached an inventory discrepancy. You did not guess at the source. You gathered data until the source became obvious. I found, when I understood this later, that I was very glad she had been looking. Merritt knew. I understood this from the way she looked at me the next time I came to the linen room, not with surprise, not with gratitude that was performed and formal, but with a kind of recalibration. The way you recalibrate when the conditions change and you have to account for something you did not previously factor in. She was doing the math quietly, and what she was calculating was what kind of man I was, what category, whether her assessment needed adjusting. She was working a repair on the hall runner section. The new thread matched carefully to the old. Pip was explaining to a piece of charcoal the proper way to draw a wolf. I came in on the pretext of checking the pattern rubbing and stayed for 20 minutes. At some point, without looking up from the runner, she said, "You didn't have to do that." I said, "I know." A pause. Her hands kept moving, the needle going through the weave with a precision that I had begun to understand was not natural talent, but the product of years of making herself exact at things. She noticed, Merritt said. "Pip," she said. The loud one stopped coming. She said, "Did you make him stop?" I said, "No." "What did she say?" "She said the tall one did it." Merritt looked up. "She is 3.5. "I know." "She sees things," Merritt said. "She always has, since she was very small. I don't know where she got it." I thought but did not say. "She got it from you. She got it from watching a woman who reads every room before she walks into it, and who keeps her assessments very quiet and very precise, and who decided, somewhere in those 2 years, that the only way to stay safe was to see everything before it arrived." Instead I said, "The runner is coming well." "It is 6 more days." 6 more days. I went to my other work and found myself counting forward to the end of those 6 days, which was not something I had done in a long time, the counting toward rather than the counting of. The 5th week, I brought Merritt a problem. This was not an accident. I had a problem that was genuine, a discrepancy in the East Wing inventory that Oswin had flagged, and that I had asked 3 different people to look at, and none of them had found the source. And I had thought, when I saw their notes, that she would find it in approximately half the time any of them had taken. I was right. She found it in 12 minutes. The source was a recording error made 18 months ago that had propagated through 4 subsequent quarterly reconciliations, without anyone catching it because the numbers balanced across each individual quarter. It did not balance when you laid all 4 side by side. She laid them side by side and showed me with a blunt gesture that was entirely matter of fact and said, "This one is wrong. The others all derived from this one." I looked at the 4 quarters laid out. "How did you know to look laterally?" I said. "Because the quarterly totals all balanced," she said. "If the error were random, it would have shown up differently each time. When a thing keeps working out exactly right, something upstream is wrong." I looked at her. She looked back at me, and there was something in her expression that was trying very hard not to be amused. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'll write it up properly." "I don't need it written up," I said. "I need to understand how you thought about it." So she told me. She talked for 12 minutes about how she approached an inventory that didn't balance, and what she looked for first and what she discarded and why. And I listened the way I listened when someone was telling me something worth knowing. Pip, at her side, got up and went to the window and looked out at the east yard and came back and said there was a wolf sleeping by the corner post. She told me it was Pocket. She was certain. "How do you know?" I said. "His ear," she said. "It goes sideways when he sleeps. Only Pocket does that." I had known that wolf for 4 years and had not noticed his ear. "You're right," I said. She went back to the window, satisfied. Merritt was watching her with that expression again, the one that was pride and something quieter underneath. And then she looked at me, and for a moment we were both watching a 3.5-year-old who had memorized the sleeping ears of wolves. "She is going to be formidable," I said. "She already is," Merritt said. "I'm mostly trying to keep up." There was an evening in the 5th week when I came past the linen room late, and found the door still open and the candle still burning. Pip had fallen asleep on the folded blanket in the corner, one arm around Bramble's flank, the old wolf motionless and very deliberate about it in the way he had become deliberate about her. Merritt was still working, not on a runner that evening, but on a small piece of mending that was clearly Pip's, a tear in the hem of a dress repaired with stitches so small, and even I nearly missed them. She heard me in the doorway and looked up. In the low candle glow she looked less guarded than she did in daylight. Not unguarded, but as though the part of herself she spent energy on managing had set itself down for the evening, and what was left was simply her, being tired in a warm room with her daughter asleep in a corner. I said, "The dress will last another year." "2," she said. "If she doesn't grow too fast." She looked at Pip. "She's been growing fast." "Children do," I said. "I know." She looked back at the mending. "She asked me today if wolves dream. I said I didn't know. She said she was going to ask Bramble. I said Bramble doesn't speak. She said she was going to ask him anyway and see what his face did." "What did his face do?" I said. She said it did the thinking look. Merritt turned the dress hem over in her hands. "She is very certain about what all the faces mean." "She is right about most of them," I said. Merritt was quiet for a moment. "She asked me something else today," she said. "She asked if the tall one was going to be there tomorrow." "What did you tell her?" I said I didn't know. She did not look up from the mending. "I thought you should know," she asked. I stayed in the doorway for a moment longer. "Tell her yes," I said. She looked up then. Something moved in her face that she had not entirely controlled. "Good night, my lord," she said. "Good night, Merritt," I said. I walked back through the keep in the dark, and my wolf was so warm and so certain I nearly stopped in the middle of the corridor to sit with it. My wolf had an opinion. He did not voice it in any complicated way. He was not a complicated animal. What he did was this. Every time I was within 10 feet of Merritt or the child, he went warm and alert and very attentive, and every time I moved away from that part of the keep he went quiet again with a patience that was almost pointed. I had not felt this from him in 6 years. Not since before Sira died. And it was, I want to be careful with this because the truth of it matters, it was not the same as it had been with Sira. With Sira it had been a thunderclap. Immediate, burning, the recognition that the books describe and that the stories use as their example of how the bond is supposed to arrive. This was slower than that. It was quieter. It had been building for 4 weeks before I admitted it was building at all, and it had spent those 4 weeks deepening in a way that felt less like arriving and more like becoming legible, like a rubbing coming clear under a steady hand. My wolf did not care that I had noticed late. He was simply content that I had noticed. The bond, when it settled fully, felt like this, the way an architectural drawing becomes a room, not in the moment the first line goes on the paper, and not in the moment the roof goes on. In the moment you walk through the door for the first time and stand in the space and realize, with a clarity that has nothing to do with planning or logic, that you are already home. That the lines on the paper were describing something that was always going to exist. You were simply working toward it. I sat with this for 2 days. I did not go to the linen room. I went about my duties and attended my council meetings and authorized the granary decision and answered every letter from the Eastern lords. And in the evenings I sat with my wolf and let him be warm and patient and did not argue with him, and thought about a woman who went through 12 years of dye-lot records to match a thread color. On the 3rd day, Oswin came to find me. He said, "The hall runner is finished." I said, "I know." He said she was going to bring it to me for the formal record. I said, tell her to bring it to me instead. Oswin's face did the thing it did. He nodded and went. She came in the late afternoon, the runner folded over her arm and Pip at her side, both of them in their good clothes, because she had understood this was a formal presentation and had prepared accordingly. This was so exactly like her that I felt something very simple and very certain settle in the center of my chest. She laid the runner on the table and unfolded it. It was perfect. The chevron pattern came through as clean as the original cleaner, because the original had 40 years of wear in it, and the new section had been matched so carefully to the old that you had to know where to look to find the seam. She had found it. She was the only one in the keep who could. The seam is at the third chevron from the east end, she said. I could not make it completely invisible. I thought you should know where it is. You matched the thread weight across 4 different dye lots, I said. I had been looking at it. I had been looking at it for some time. Yes, the green was the hardest. She paused. Your supply records go back 12 years. I found the original dye lot reference and worked from there. I looked up. You went through 12 years of supply records. To get the color right, she said, as though this were entirely ordinary. Pip had climbed onto the chair beside my desk, not by permission, simply because it was there, and was looking at the papers on my desk with tremendous interest. She picked up a quill and regarded it with serious intent. That is for writing, I said. I know, she said. Ma'am writes. She writes everything down. She held the quill up and examined it at length. Are you going to write something now? In a moment, I said. I looked at Merritt. She was watching me with that careful, direct gaze, and I could see, in the steadiness of it, that she knew something was happening and that she was deciding how much of herself to show in response. She had spent 2 years in my keep showing exactly as much of herself as was necessary and no more. She was trying to calculate whether this was still the same situation or whether it had become something else entirely. I said, the runner is exceptional work. Thank you, my lord. Merritt. A pause, she heard the difference. Yes. I said, you have been here 2 years, and in those 2 years no supply record has come through my desk with an error. Not one. You found the invoice discrepancy in the eastern stores in the first month. Oswin told me later that it had been there for 3 years and no one had caught it. You made a rubbing of a 40-year-old pattern because you thought I would want to keep it. You went through 12 years of dye lot records to match a thread color. I stopped. I noticed these things. She was very still. I notice other things as well, I said. I notice that you read every room before you walk into it. I notice that your daughter is more at ease in this keep than she was 4 weeks ago. I notice, and here I stopped again, because the next thing I was going to say was significant, and I wanted to say it plainly and correctly, that you have done the work of a woman who intends to stay somewhere, not the work of a woman who is keeping her options open. Something moved in her face, very small, very controlled. I have liked it here, she said. I know, I looked at the runner. I would like you to stay. Pip, from her chair, said, we are staying. This was not a question. She was still examining the quill. She said it the way she said all things she considered established. Merritt said very quietly, Pip. We are though, Pip said. You said so. I looked at Pip. I looked at Merritt. Something moved across Merritt's face that was, briefly, unguarded, something warm and frightened and very much alive, before she brought it back into order. When did I say so? She asked her daughter. At night, Pip said. You said, I think we might stay, love. You said it when I was supposed to be asleep. A silence. You were not asleep, Merritt said. No, Pip agreed cheerfully. She appeared entirely undisturbed by this. I said very carefully, is it true? Merritt looked at me. She looked at me for a long time, in the way she looked at things when she was doing a very exact calculation, and then she said, yes. That one word. She gave it to me like a very precise measurement, like a rubbing off a 40-year-old pattern. Exactly what it was, exactly as much as she had, no more and no less, but the paper held the impression, and the impression was true. Good, I said. That evening, I asked Merritt to walk with me in the outer corridor after she had settled Pip for the night. She came, carefully, in the way she did everything, and we walked the length of the East Gallery and back, and I told her what my wolf had been saying for 4 weeks and what I had spent 2 days sitting with and what I was certain of now. I told her plainly. I did not perform certainty I did not have, but the certainty I did have was very clean and I wanted her to be able to see it. I said, I do not know everything that you carry. I know you came from a pack you left, and I did not ask why, and I do not need to ask now unless you want to tell me. I know your daughter's father is not in her life, and I did not ask about that either, and that is not what this is. This is this. I have watched you work for 4 weeks, and I have watched you love your daughter, and I have felt my wolf go warm and certain every time I am in the part of the keep where you are. And I am not a man who ignores what is certain when it has been this consistent for this long. She listened to all of this without interrupting. When I stopped, she was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet I could hear her thinking, the careful structural way she thought about everything. Then she said, Pip is not yours. I know, I said. She calls you the tall one, she said. She has since the first day. She has not called anyone else anything in particular, just the tall one. She paused. She asked me last week if the tall one was going to eat dinner with us. I said no. She said, but he should. I did not say anything for a moment. It would. Merritt stopped, started again. If this were real, she said. If this became something, she would attach. She already has, I can see it. If this became something and then it stopped, she carries things. She is 3.5 and she already carries things and I am not, I cannot. It would not stop, I said. You say that. I do, I said. And I mean it in the specific way that I mean things when I mean them, which is that I have thought about it carefully and I am not uncertain and I would not say it if I were. I stopped walking. She stopped beside me. The East Gallery was very quiet, the candles low in their holders, the window at the end showing the beginning of a cold night, the stars beginning to appear over the western ridge. She reached up and took my hand, I said, in the corridor, the first day. And I stood there for 3 extra seconds. I had a council meeting. I was not in a hurry to be anywhere else. That was the day. Merritt was looking at me. I do not know yet what all of this becomes, I said, but I know what it is. And I am telling you what it is so that you can decide, not so that I can decide for you. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Pip decided for both of us. She is very decisive. Something moved in Merritt's face, and this time she did not bring it back into order. She let it be there. It was the full version of the expression I had seen in the linen room when she watched her daughter and thought she was not being watched, the one that was pride and something underneath it, quieter. The kind of longing you carry so long you stop expecting to have answered, the small daily kind. She said, I have been careful for a long time. I know, I said. I came here and I did the work and I kept my head down and I was careful. She looked at the end of the gallery, at the dark window and the cold night. And then your keep was, it was very, she stopped. The supply records go back 12 years, she said. They are exact. The dilot references are filed by season and cross-reference to the vendor ledger. Someone in this keep cared very much about getting things right. My head of records has been with me for 15 years. I know, I asked him. She looked back at me. I asked him after the first week. I said, why are the records like this? And he said, because the Alpha King does not want errors and he reads them himself and he can tell. She paused. That is unusual. Oswin says it is excessive. Oswin said thorough, she said, to me. I felt something very warm and very specific, which was my wolf noting that she had asked about me. That she had asked in her careful, quiet way that looked like professional curiosity and was something else as well. I said, "You were looking." She did not look away. "I was looking," she said. A pause. The cold night was very quiet outside the gallery window. "The pack I left," she said carefully, "at the Revel settlements. I left because the Alpha's mate decided she didn't like me being there, not for any reason that was mine. There was no wrong I had done." She stopped. "I want you to know that, because you didn't ask and that is kind of you, but I want it said plainly. I left a place that was mine and had been mine for 4 years, and I took Pip, and I walked out on a morning in early autumn with a bag and a child and a letter of reference, and I found work here, and I did not look back." "I know," I said. "You don't know," she said, "but you are taking my word for it, and that is—" She stopped again. "I am not accustomed to that." I said, "You could have looked back." "No," she said, "I couldn't. She was 4 months old when we left. I had to look forward." I thought about a woman with a 4-month-old child and a bag and a letter of reference walking out of a pack on an autumn morning, and something settled very clear and very certain in the center of my chest. I said, "The Revel Alpha made a choice about what she wanted to tolerate in her pack. I am making a different choice. These are not the same situation." Merritt looked at me. In the low candlelight of the gallery, I could see that she was deciding something, could see the decision forming in her face the way I had learned to watch for it, that slight stilling before she committed to a thing. "No," she said, "they are not." We stood in the East Gallery for a while longer. The night settled outside the window. At some point she put her hand on the gallery rail and I put my hand over it, not quickly, giving her time to move if she wanted to, and she did not move. We stood like that for a while, with our hands overlapping on the cold stone, and my wolf was the warmest and most settled I had felt him since I could remember. "I need to go back," she said finally. "She will wake up in the night. She always does." "I know," I said. "I'll walk with you." What happened after took the shape of careful things. She stayed. We did not make a ceremony of it immediately, not because I was uncertain, but because Merritt was a woman who needed to test the truth of a thing over time before she trusted it, and I understood this and I respected it. We had mornings in the East Gallery and evenings in the corridor, and I came to the linen room not on pretext now, but simply because I was there, and she gave me tea when she had it, and I brought her the supply authorizations she needed in person, rather than sending them through Oswin, which he noted without comment. Pip continued to take my hand in corridors. She showed me more drawings. She was working through the alphabet in the small charcoal book, and had a very specific opinion about the letter G, which she found unsatisfying and kept redrawing. She told me, with the particular authority of the very young, that the wolves in the eastern yard needed better names, because the names they had were boring, and when I asked what she would name them, she gave me a list of 9 names that included Bramble, Pocket, Soot, the Thinking One, Mudfoot, and Twice, which was not a name but was the name she had given to 2 wolves she had decided were the same wolf. "They are not the same wolf," I said. "They are both gray," she said. "Many wolves are gray." She considered this very seriously and then said, "But these 2 are the same kind of gray." My wolves, for their part, had all come to the same conclusion my wolf had come to, in the wordless way that animals arrive at conclusions. The 2 youngest from the East litter had taken to coming to the linen room door in the mornings and sitting outside it until Merritt opened it, and let them in for approximately 15 minutes, which was how long she could work with 2 wolves and a child in the room before the geometry became impractical. She let them in every morning. She told them to be careful of the runner frames. They were careful. Bramble, the 12-year-old gray wolf who trusted no one and had earned this right, began sleeping outside the linen room door at night. I did not arrange this. I did not suggest it. I found out about it from Oswin, who found out about it from the night corridor boy, who found out about it by nearly tripping over a 12-year-old wolf in the dark one evening, and having a very startling moment. I watched this from the corridor. My wolf was very, very content. In the 3rd month, I brought the matter before my senior counsel. Not as a question, because it was not a question, as a statement of what was and what would be. There were 4 of them. Oswin, who had been waiting for this conversation since approximately week 2, and who I suspected had been actively managing conversations to give me time to arrive at it on my own. Rel, my counsel head, who was 60, and had the manner of a man who had counseled 3 alphas and been surprised by exactly none of them. Pavin, my head of records, who had been the one Merritt had asked about the die-lot references, and who had been telling me about it with varying degrees of indirectness for 6 weeks. And Lend, who managed outer pack relations, and who I wanted in the room because she had opinions, and I wanted to hear them before they became someone else's. I told them her name was Merritt. She had been in the keep for 2 years. She had come from the Revel settlements, and I did not require the history of why she had left, and if the council did, I would hear the argument for why and then discard it. She had a daughter. The daughter was not mine by blood and would be mine in every other sense. My wolf had been certain since the 4th week. I was not asking for permission. I was informing them of what was going to happen, and I was doing it now so that they had time to prepare the formal recognition, and so that there were no surprises. Rel said, "The Revel pack will not be pleased." I said, "The Revel pack is 50 miles from here, and I have not asked for their opinion." Rel said, "They may offer one anyway." I said, "They may." Len said, "The child. How does the pack handle the child?" I said, "The child takes my hand in corridors and has named 2 of my wolves Bramble and Pocket, and is on excellent terms with the East Bakehouse, and calls Bramble the prickly soft one, and has been sleeping behind a 12-year-old wolf who trusts no one since the 2nd month. My sense is that the pack has already made up its mind, and I am not concerned about it." Oswin made a sound. "What?" I said. "Nothing," Oswin said with complete insincerity. "I have nothing to add." Pavin said, "She came and asked me about the die-lot references." "I know. She told me the cross-referencing system was very good and asked who had designed it." "And I told her you had." He paused. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I thought it might have been." And then she went back to her inventory and did not say anything else for the rest of the morning. He looked at me with a steadiness that was its own kind of communication. I think she had already made up her mind by then as well. "She had," I said. Oswin said mildly, with the tone of a man who had been holding a thought for several weeks, "You could have mentioned this 2 months ago." "I am mentioning it now." Len said, "When?" "The next full pack gathering," I said. "I want it done properly and in front of everyone." I told Merritt before I told the pack. I told her the evening before the gathering, in the East Gallery, the way I had told her everything since the beginning, plainly, and with all the particulars laid out so that she could see exactly what I was certain of and where the edges were. I told her about the council meeting, and what I had said, and what they had said, and that I had not asked for permission and would not. She listened. When I was done, she said, "The formal name." "Luna," I said. "You do not have to use it every day, but formally, yes, and the child." "Pip is Pip," she said. "I am not changing anything about Pip." "I wouldn't," I said, "but I want it clear, formally and in the record, that she is mine, in every way that it can be made clear. I want Pavin to write it in the ledger, and I want Oswin to witness it, and I want the pack to know." Merritt was very still. "She is 3.5, she said. "I know. She took your hand because she is 3.5 and she takes everyone's hand," she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. "She is not, she can't decide what this means. She doesn't know what any of this means. She knew your name before I ever used it. She started drawing you in the 1st week." "I know," I said. "She showed me all of them. I am more rectangular in the early ones." Merritt pressed one hand flat against the gallery wall, the way she did when she was doing a very careful calculation. Her eyes were very bright. "She told me last night," Merritt said, "that she wanted to name the wolf by the south gate." "What did she want to name him?" "The thinking one," she said. "She said he looked like he was always thinking about something." A pause. "She's not wrong." "She rarely is," I said. Merritt looked at me. She looked at me for a long time, in the way she looked at the very fine work before she made the final stitch, deciding whether everything was as true as she thought it was, making sure she had not missed anything, making sure the measurement was right and not what she hoped it was. She had not missed anything. The measurement was right. She said, "All right." The pack gathered in the great hall on a cold evening at the end of the month. They gathered for the harvest accounts, which was the official reason, and I presented those first. The grain numbers, the winter store projection, the border assessment summary, the Eastern Lord's formal agreements, all of it orderly and complete. The accounts were good. My pack had worked hard and the season had been kind and the keep was sound. We ate and the hall was warm, and at the end I stood and said that there was one more matter. I said Merritt's name. She was standing near the door. She had been careful to stand near the door, because she did not yet know with her whole body that it was all right not to, and I watched her look up from across the hall. I said, "She has been with us for 2 years. I said, "In those 2 years the upper hall records have been exact, and the runner repairs have been done in the original pattern, and the supply discrepancies have been found and corrected. And the East Bakehouse has had someone to talk to in the mornings who has a very specific opinion about the letter G," I said. She went through 12 years of die lot records to match a thread color and did not mention it to me until I asked. And when I asked, she explained her methodology, and the methodology was sound. I said, "My wolf has been certain since the 4th week, and I am not a man who ignores what is certain when it has been certain for this long. I said she is my Luna, and the child is mine. And if anyone in this hall wants to argue that a woman who found a 4-quarter inventory error that had stood for 3 years, and then explained her reasoning clearly, and without vanity is anything other than exactly what this pack needed, I am interested in the argument, but I do not expect to find it persuasive." The hall was very quiet. Oswin was not quiet. He said distinctly from his place at the council table, 12 years of records. Pavin beside him said, "She called the cross-referencing system good." Rel, who had the manner of a man who had counseled 3 alphas, said nothing. He stood up and bowed, a slow, deliberate bow, the kind that means something, and the rest of the council stood and bowed. And then the pack stood, not because I had commanded it, but because they had been watching for 2 months and they had their own accounting. Pip, who had been standing beside her mother at the door, said, into the quiet that followed, "Is that it?" Merritt said quietly, "Pip, are we done? Because the wolves are outside and I want to go see if Pocket is there tonight. His ear goes sideways when he sleeps and I want to draw it." Someone in the hall made a sound that was, I was fairly certain, a laugh that became several laughs, and then Pip looked around, pleased, because she liked when things were lively. I crossed the hall. I did not hurry. I did not need to hurry. I stopped in front of Merritt and held out my hand, and she put hers in it, and I covered it, carefully, the way she did everything, the way I was learning to do things around her, and that was the whole of the formal claiming. That and the truth of the last 3 months laid out in the open where everyone in the hall could see it and account for it. Her hand was very steady. "The thinking one is definitely there tonight," I said. "He is usually." Pip said, "Does he think about the same things or different things each time?" "I have never asked him." "We could ask," she said entirely seriously, "if we went now." We went. What I know now, which I did not have words for at the time, is this. The blueprint is not the room. You can draw every line correctly and account for every measurement, and still not know what the room is until you are standing inside it for the first time. The room is not finished when the walls go up. It is finished when the morning light comes through the window, and there is someone in it making tea and counting things, and a child in the corner explaining to a wolf the proper way to sit on a stool. And you understand that the whole shape of the space was designed for exactly this, from the first line on the paper, and that you were simply working toward it all along. My wolf is very warm. The East Gallery runner looks exactly as it always did, except at the third chevron from the east end, if you know where to look. Only Merritt and I and 12 years of die-lot records know where to look, and the seam is exact, and it holds. Bramble sleeps outside the door every night. I have not asked him to. I have not told him not to. He is 12 years old and he has decided, and 12-year-old wolves who trust no one and have earned that right are not redirected. Pip renamed the wolf by the South Gate last week. She told him his name was the Thinking One, and she said it to his face, and showed him the drawing she had made of him in the charcoal book. He sat and looked at her with a great dignity for a long moment, and then he lay down and put his head on her feet, and she patted it, and he appeared to find this satisfactory. She is 4 now, really 4, not the kind she told Bryn in the bakehouse. She tells me so at regular intervals, as a matter of record that she wants confirmed. I write it down. She likes that I write it down. She checks the page to make sure I have spelled her name correctly, which I always have. I always will.